Good morning, and welcome aboard to our stream today. It's fantastic to be back and to really get a chance to talk about everything that's happened over the past couple weeks. Even though we haven't been live over the past couple weeks, I feel like Marvel Comics, per usual, has been super busy. A lot of the publishing side over on the X-Men comics has been nothing short of phenomenal. I feel like right now the Spider-Man books are shipping really fast and really furiously over with the Eight Deaths of Spider-Man line. Plus, we have new information about the future of Ultimate comic books and Free Comic Book Day. Marvel just released some brand new pages yesterday, so we have a really packed stream on board for you today. I want to take just a few moments before we start our stream to touch on one of the comic books that I missed over the past few weeks, and that would just be the phenomenal, exceptional X-Men 4. Just as a precursor, I've really been loving a lot of the main X-Men and Uncanny X-Men entries, especially towards the Raid on Greymalkin series. But I just thought that the level of subtext that author Eve Ewing and artist Carmen Carnero were able to bring to the latest issue of Exceptional X-Men really made this comic book in particular stand out against all the other comic books in the line. First off, I think Carmen Carnero, per usual, and I think we've said this like every single time we've talked about Exceptional X Men, is just amazing at depicting so much subtext from our core cast of characters. This is really important because we're dealing with a group of younger heroes. The issue kicks off with a look over at Bronze Trista. Over in her school life, which is really interesting. I think it's pretty fascinating to see what she's like as a teenager as opposed to a full on X Men mutant character. Also, we've really been getting a chance to see over these past couple issues with our younger exceptional X Men team of heroes teaming up with both Emma Frost and Kitty Pryde to try and get a stronger grip towards some of their powers. In fact, a lot of the drama and subtext for the issue came in with the surprise appearance of Iceman, a figure who Kitty used to be really familiar with in just a huge amount of context in X Men issues. And watching Kitty kind of come to grips with her new relationship with Iceman, I think, over the course of this issue is just phenomenal and really pulls on so many disparate aspects of her characterization. Plus, like so many other X Men comic books have done, this one kind of cuts right into the heart of what Kitty was experiencing over Krakoa and deals directly with some of the PTSD that she had during some of those other series. Honestly, interestingly enough, I think it's quite fascinating to see how Kitty is just unable to hide some of her PTSD and the really harsh experiences that she has towards these towards these new group of mutant characters that she's been shepherding, and that's been, of course, Axo, Bronze, and Melee, who really come to grips with some of the violent activities that Kitty really embarked on over the course of Krakoa in some of those final pages. And I'm sure you can really get an idea that that artist Carmen Carnero is able to imbue so many just bold and beautiful facial expressions for these characters as they really get a glimpse at just what Kitty is experiencing emotionally over the course of the issue. I really strongly encourage you, if you haven't been keeping up with it, to make sure to check in on Exceptional X Men, especially for any big fans of Kitty Pryde. I just think some of the writing that Ewing has been bringing towards Kitty has made her feel like a multifaceted and dimensional character, unlike any comic book that I think we've experienced past the Krakoan era. I really loved a lot of what author Jerry Dugan was able to do with the character of Kitty Pryde during his main X-Men series, but I feel like this one is able to get even deeper into Kitty Pryde's character, just being that she is the main character and protagonist of this series here. Okay, without further ado, I want to officially welcome you over to the stream, everybody. I know we've been gone over the past couple weeks. It's fantastic to finally be back on stream and to catch up with everybody. Before we dig into some of the most recent comic book previews, reviews, and all of the material and content we have on board today, I just want to quickly recap what's been going on in the realm of Marvel Comics, especially as it pertains to the X-Men franchise. So very recently, not only the main X-Men series from Jed MacKay, but also the Uncanny X-Men series from Gail Simone has really been ensnared in this really, really interesting Raid on Greymalkin crossover at Marvel Comics. Frankly, this has been so much fun for me because this storyline was actually teased before the ending of the Krakoan era over at Marvel Comics, as the last issue referenced the villainous Dr. Ellis of X-Men in that previous incarnation. So it's been quite shocking to me to see that only a couple months into the X-Men's latest From the Ashes launch, we've already gotten a direct confrontation between multiple groups of X-Men characters and just the villainous operation that Dr. Karina Ellis has been mounting against the X-Men over at the Greymalkin prison, the former Xavier Institute over at Marvel Comics. Author Gail Simone has done an excellent job teasing that there's going to be some big animosity and ramifications between not only Rogue but also Cyclops and some of their disparate teams across the series. I really feel like in some of the past issues of X-Men, especially in this latest chapter of the main series, we really got to see these two characters come to grips and shed some of their different ideologies about how they feel about Professor Xavier. Honestly, I was really quite shocked at some of those final pages and just the final feelings that both of these individuals have towards Xavier. And I think both of these artists and Marvel's editorial just did a wonderful job building up to this really interesting and climactic moment. A little bit later on in the stream today, we're going to be touching on the final installments of Raid on Greymalkin, which I really wonder is going to be how final for the character of Dr. Karina Ellis and just all this conflict that's been brewing across all the X-Men issues lately. Plus, we now have the return of Professor Xavier, so I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how he's going to fit into the rest of the narrative, especially versus what's been going on in some of these final elements of Krakoa, and the fact that so many of these X-Men characters really have some hard feelings towards how Professor Xavier was trying to, fight back alongside the mutants with Rise of the Powers of 10. So I feel like there's going to be just so much conflict between our X-Men characters as we move to this next big and interesting phase in terms of our X-Men characters for From the Ashes. So later on in our stream today, we are definitely going to be diving into the upcoming X-Manhunt crossover that's going to seemingly extend throughout the X-Men comic books as we head into the next couple months of publishing. Elsewhere, to my surprise and to my horror, just to be completely honest, it looks like the Spider-Man comic book series is relaunching with a brand new #1. I was really hoping that Marvel Comics was just going to continue with the numbering that Zeb Wells started, even as they moved into the Joe Kelly phase of publishing. It really seemed like they were going to move into that direction because as they started the brand new 8 Deaths of Spider-Man storyline, which relaunched and refreshed the creative team, they actually continued the numbering. But it looks like Marvel Comics once again pulled a fast one on us here, and we're going to look at how the publisher is planning on relaunching in the middle of a creator's run. I think this may be justified, maybe in terms of, Spider-Man relaunching into a brand new premise and maybe kind of shifting away from the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. But I'm still curious at this point if the publisher is really going to be able to relay that sense of, I think progression, especially as we move into a storyline that may be a little bit more traditional for the rest of these comic books. Elsewhere, a little bit later on in our stream too, we're going to be touching on the latest issue of All New Venom. I think that series has been pretty fun so far with teasing, which character across the Marvel Universe actually got a hold of Dylan Brock's symbiote. I think Al Ewing created a really interesting mystery in terms of the first issue of that series, and I'm curious to see how he and Carlos Gomez are going to be following that up in the latest issue of that series. But finally, I think the first thing we're going to go ahead and touch on today is going to be some of the latest issues over in the Ultimate Comic Books. Right now, I feel like the Ultimate Comic Books are so much fun between everything that Peach Momoko has been cooking up in terms of exceptional X-Men, and even just, I think, the breakneck pacing that Dennis Camp and artist Juan Ferreri have been lending to the core Ultimate series. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and jump into our first news story of the day. This is going to be a review of last week's incredibly fun issue of Ultimates issue 8. We already mentioned the creative team up top here, but this one is written by Dennis Camp, featuring some artwork over from Juan Ferreri. This one was actually beautiful in terms of the visuals here, just like Carmen Carnero, who we talked about in terms of exceptional X-Men. I really found that artist Juan Ferreri just does a great job pulling on some of the subtext and teasing the really interesting relationship elements that readers can sort of tease out towards this new group of the Ultimate Guardians of the Galaxy, especially as it extends towards our relatively new Ultimates cast of characters here. So this issue spends like no time just introducing some of these concepts here and teasing the introduction of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And as soon as we get to meet some of these new characters, I think it's pretty clear that the character of Captain Marvel, who we can see here, has a predetermined relationship with America Chavez that she has a hard time remembering. For me, it feels like this was kind of the conflict of the issue and just a major emotional theme that really kind of stemmed a lot of conflict between our Guardians characters as well as our Ultimates heroes. It was also interesting to hear the Ultimates interpretation of what their battle with the Maker is going to look like here in the near future. Captain Marvel, in particular, seemed incredibly pessimistic about the Ultimates' odds in battling the Maker moving forward. But I'm hoping that when our team of Ultimates finally fight back against the character of the Maker, they're really going to have like a big conflict and maybe a brand new team of heroes to call upon with these new Guardians of the Galaxy characters. We got a little bit of characterization for some of our other characters, including the brand new Cosmo, the Star Stalker, I believe is his name. And plus, we had the Ultimate Nullifier going up against Captain America in one of those panels, too. That was a lot of fun to see. Plus, the new character of Star-Lord had a really interesting confrontation with the remixed version of Doom that we got to see much later in the issue, too. So I do think there's a ton of interesting characterization that Dennis Camp was able to squeeze into this really like big and bombastic issue that teased like a brand new team of characters going up against our Ultimates heroes. Finally, though, I feel like so much of the emotion from the issue just stemmed between the relationship with America and Captain Marvel. So I'm really curious to see how that develops moving forward and if our heroes are going to be able to unlock some of those memories and return to their relationship, or if this brand new era of America Chavez is going to look different with our new team of Ultimates characters. That being said, though, I think the introduction of these characters is extremely hard to pull off over the course of one issue, and I think Dennis Camp was able to squeeze in enough plot threads to definitely keep my interest as the issue moves on here. I'm very curious to see where the Ultimate series is headed next, and I'm hoping that when our team has this big, massive confrontation against the Maker, they're going to have a brand new team of allies to call upon here. AfroSF, thank you so much for checking out our stream today. AfroSF says, greetings and Happy New Year. The only X books I can afford at the moment are Exceptional X-Men and Storm. Is she an Avenger now? I am enjoying them both. Oh, I'm so glad you wrote that comment because that actually leads us to another comic book that I've recently started reading again in a ton more depth that I've had a lot of fun with. Give me just a few moments as we go ahead and pull up this brand new news story, and then we will jump right into it here. Out of all the comic book series in the X-Men line, I would say if you're like reading them all individually, I feel like Exceptional X-Men gives you a much like greater picture of Kitty Pryde's characterization. And I really think that the main X-Men series is so much better if you read it alongside the Uncanny X-Men series, as they both kind of inform each other. But although I think the most recent issue of Exceptional X-Men did a great job, maybe teasing, some of the elements of Rogue from Uncanny X-Men 2, but just more as an ancillary point and not something that's really core to the main series of comics. AfroSF also says, I love all the Ultimate books. Ultimates 8 was amazing. I may be speculating, but I think Dennis Camp is restoring America Chavez as the only one in the multiverse. That's really interesting. It's also going to be a great launching point as we talk about the brand new preview pages that Marvel dropped recently for the free comic book day issues, which actually tease a little bit of the character relationships that was initially brought in that free comic book day issue teasing Ultimate Invasion. So we're definitely going to be touching on that a little bit later on the stream. But for now, we're going to be returning over to your first comment and talking about one of my surprise favorite issues that I've read over the past couple weeks, and that is none other than Avengers 22. Now, when Avengers first came out from Jed MacKay and CF Via, I was just hyping up this series to no end. I thought the confrontation between Murden, the Twilight Court, Kang the Conqueror, and our Avengers characters was such an interesting way to set up these stories. But as we got like deeper and deeper into the Avengers, I felt like nothing was really happening in the main series, and there wasn't really a sense of progression between the Avengers fighting these really interesting foes that they had set up, so far in previous issues. However, I think the direction and tone of the main Avengers series changed significantly as a Storm entered the main Avengers roster and just brought this really interesting sense of fun to the series. Jed MacKay has just really dialed up so many fun character interactions between our Avengers characters. And I think Avengers 21 was also a really special issue as it brought the characters from Merle, Alaska over to the main Avengers series. And watching, the interactions between figures like, Juggernaut and Magic with the rest of our Avengers characters was just an absolute blast. It was such a phenomenal issue, and I think really changed the direction of, the latest Avengers series. So let's go ahead and see how Avengers 22 is really just continuing that interesting sense of plotting and just really interesting sense of character dynamics that's always been teased inherently in this Avengers series. Also, I would say too, Jed MacKay has been doing such a great job with the core X-Men comic book. I just find it really awe-inspiring that he's taking on so many comic books right now, and they're at such like a high level of quality here. So Avengers 22 actually is illustrated by Fareed Karami as opposed to CF Via. I really found that Karami as an artist is just so detailed in terms of his expressions, even more than CF Via. And this is really fantastic because there's a lot of subtlety throughout this brand new issue of Avengers. There's a lot of relationship dynamics that kind of resurface, especially as you get like deeper towards the runtime here. And I really found that Scarlet Witch kind of reenacting her relationship with the Vision across some of these pages looked beautiful, thanks to all the disparate lines and like cross hatching that Fareed Karami was able to lend towards this series. I feel like this comic book immediately put the pedal to the metal as Captain Marvel really began to tease the missing moment involving Kang the Conqueror and just immediately started to set up some of those plot elements that we were teased at in the very beginning of the main Avengers series. On one hand, it can feel kind of daunting for this comic book to be in like its second year of publishing, heading into its third year and still dealing with Kang and Murden and the Twilight Court. But the way that Jed MacKay was able to resurface this plot thread was a lot of fun, as these characters are teased by a secret data archive that may be belonging to Kang that they may actually have to steal. So the Avengers are getting ready to set up like a big heist kind of storyline here. Once again, Fareed Karami does such a wonderful job lending so much expression to figures like Wanda Maximoff and Tony Stark here. And frankly, I think there's a ton of fun to be had when you get to see just how close Wanda seemingly gets to Vision due to the fact that there's just so much subtext in their relationship. Not only in terms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but also just throughout so many years of straight up publishing here. So our Avengers actually head over to the Speculatorium of N. Dweegast, the Grandmaster, also known as the greatest casino in the Eighth Cosmos, where Storm and Scarlet Witch try and mount a distraction in order for the rest of our Avengers characters to really get a tease at that data archive belonging to Kang that may provide some clues towards the missing moments. There's a ton of interesting character setup and just really interesting like heist mechanics that happened in the back of the issue as we get to see, Storm, Scarlet Witch, and Vision cause such a ruckus over on the casino floor. Where in the background here we have figures like Tony Stark, Captain Marvel, and Sam Wilson trying to do what they can to break into the vault. This storyline all culminates with the really interesting character of Black Cat that Jed McKay has also spent so much time writing towards the back of the series, as well as a couple more interesting plot threads revolving the missing moments and a few other items that's just been building towards Jed McKay's run for so many issues of Avengers. Frankly, if you haven't already, I would really encourage you to go back and check out Jed McKay's Black Cat run. It was so amazing. And I really found that some of the subtlety and references to that series in this latest Avengers issue were a lot of fun, especially as Tony Stark in particular starts referencing some of the interesting, what's the word, encounters that she's had with Black Cat over the course of her main series. So I am so happy to see Jed McKay kind of unearthing so many comic books to intersect in a really interesting way in this brand new issue of Avengers. And I also thought it was really, really novel to see Jed McKay head back into this storyline involving Kang the Conqueror and the missing moment in such a creative way. Resurfacing a character who he spent so much time with, being Felicia Hardy. So I cannot believe how much I enjoyed this latest issue of Avengers. If you're a fan of Black Cat or some of the other characters that we mentioned, you absolutely cannot miss this comic book. Okay, we have another comic book to talk about in just a few moments too, and this one was really, really wild. I'd say out of everything I read this week, this one was probably the absolute craziest. Give me just a few moments here as I'm going to pull up the issue just so I can remember enough plot threads to talk about it in earnest. Okay, I don't think it's any surprise to say that I'm a huge, huge fan of Betsy Braddock, being the name of the channel and just so many aspects of this character. I thought she's been incredibly fascinating throughout the Krakoan era, but it was so sad to see so many of Betsy's books canceled before I really feel like they were able to touch on their full premise in the last era of Krakoa. Thankfully, though, Betsy is up in front center in one of the most important From the Ashes comic books with X Force. And this issue, as we mentioned earlier, just puts her as the protagonist of the core series as we really get to dive in towards her really interesting and emotional relationship with the character of Rachel Ascani over the course of the issue. This one is still written by Jeffrey Thorne, featuring artwork from Jim Toe, which is a little bit different than our regular series artist, Marcus Toe, across the series. Marcus Toe is such a wonderful artist. He does such a great job rendering just so much precision in terms of his line and the character anatomy. However, I really thought Jim Toe did a great job stepping into some of his shoes. I will say, across this comic book series, I think Jim Toe's art is a lot more stylized than Marcus Toe, but that really has his own advantages here, as I think when Toe is able to get a little bit more surreal in terms of the visuals, there's just a little bit more personality that you can witness across some of these pages here. That being said, I sure would like to see Marcus Toe return to the series, in just a couple months here, because there's just something really magical about the way he's able to render Jeffrey Thorne's incredibly dense scripts and really interesting characters across this series. Okay, so this one actually opens with the characters of Forge and the new character of Tank playing a game across the issue, which quickly seeds and references the subplot involving Betsy Braddock and Rachel Ascani throughout the series, as they're introduced to a private mindscape that Rachel was able to build across, or excuse me, not Rachel, but Betsy was able to build over for some of these characters here. Seeing Betsy and Rachel really spend some quality time together was really, really cathartic across this series, as I feel like these two characters have just been lingering across the background of so many previous X-Force issues. It was great to see them really come to the forefront of this series. Also, X-Force just has a really, really ambitious cast here, as we have characters, like Surge, we have the brand new mutant of Tank, and just some of the relationship dynamics between Forge and Sage have really taken center stage across this series, as they've gotten so dramatic as a result of the plotting from the past couple issues. Also, author Jeffrey Thorne is incredibly cerebral and is able to imbue so many interesting plot lines Watching him go deep into Rachel's past and pull out some of these previous aspects of her character as they're in Betsy's mindscape was a ton of fun and just a great way to explore, some of the really interesting psychic nature between these two characters on the page here. Jeffrey Thorne is an incredibly dense author, which has led so much great subtext over to this series and has been a really interesting way for this new X Force series, I think, to really differentiate itself versus the previous installment from Krakoa. Also, the villain, the character of La Diabla, is just so fascinating as she's fought the X Force characters in so many like different planes of existence. As in some of the previous issues, she was battling, I believe, Forge and Sage over in virtual reality. And in this one, she actually interrupts both Betsy and Rachel's private mindscape with a big and bombastic battle across our characters. La Diabla also has a lot of personality across this series. It feels like she's always presenting herself in a way where she's able to keep a lot of the stakes of the issue in her control and is just seemingly a character that has a lot of ambition in terms of the way that she's able to attack our X Force characters. We mentioned previously that Jeffrey Thorne is an ambitious writer, and watching him evoke just all these battles between characters on like these different planes of existence is just a great way to explore some of the character relationships and dynamics. As this issue sort of winds down on the fight between Betsy, Rachel, and La Diabla, we also get a tease at Colossus and some other characters across the series. So, really hoping moving forward that X Force is going to continue to have that great sense of ambition and still have a kind of a clear premise and idea moving forward here for the main series. However, I would just say it was great to get the spotlight on some of these characters, and I hope moving forward, author Jeffrey Thorne will be able to work with some of the other characters across his really interesting roster of heroes, and we finally get a little bit more characterization towards what's happening next with Forge and Sage in particular here. Okay, that's going to go ahead and do it over on our reviews for this week. I thought this was a really, really nice week of comic books. However, next week looks so much busier in terms of Marvel's publishing. We have a brand new X-Men solo series coming out with Magic #1. We have the return of Sync to the Marvel Comics X-Men universe after he was such a big player over in NYX. And we have the latest issue of Spider-Man. But first, I want to go ahead and check in on one of the most important comic books we're going to go ahead and touch on over on our stream today, and that would be Uncanny X-Men 8, featuring the finale of the Raid on Greymalkin crossover, the first crossover of our From the Ashes X-Men comic book series. We set a few moments setting this comic up towards the beginning of the stream here, but due to the reappearance of Professor Xavier and some of the shifting mechanics and interpretations from our lead heroes of the X-Men, there's a lot of really interesting conflict and character dynamics happening in this final issue here. I think this cover over from David Marquez is just absolutely wonderful as it teases the Uncanny X-Men characters of Rogue with these brand new heroes of the Outliers being Deathstream, Jitter, Calico, versus some of our main X-Men roster of heroes with Cyclops, Temper, Magic, Magneto, Beast, Kid Omega. So there's just such an interesting cast of characters coming to blows here. Towards the last issue of X-Men, it felt like Rogue and Cyclops were able to shed a little bit more of their animosity before Professor Xavier just put the kettle towards a boil here in some of these final pages. But first, let's go ahead and check in on what's going on here in the last issue of Raid on Greymalkin that pits both our X-Men teams together against Dr. Karina Ellis and the villainous Philip Scurvy, who we're going to see in some of these preview pages too. The explosive saga ends here, with Rogue and Cyclops on opposite ends of the mutant struggle, perhaps forever. Are they honoring Xavier's legacy or destroying it? Do they choose loyalty or the law? An all-out action issue that will affect both teams and the entire mutant community, with devastating results featuring guest artist Javier Guerin. Man, Javier Guerin has some big shoes to fill here, filling in for artist David Marquez, who's so incredible. However, I think Guerin just lends so much personality in some of his pages. I think it's quite an interesting dynamic to tease as a result of what we just read in terms of X Force with Jim Toe and Marcus Toe as well. Also, really quickly, want to shout out Tor Blakeson. They say Black Cat in the Avengers sounds interesting. It is. And even though Black Cat isn't part of the main Avengers team, she is really essential to the plot and what's going to be happening for the future of that book moving forward. And as we previously mentioned, Jed McKay's really long history with Felicia makes that plot thread feel even more potent than it would have otherwise. Okay, here's Uncanny X-Men issue 8, Legacy 708. This one is written by Gail Simone. We already shouted out Javier Guerin, colors from Matthew Wilson, and letters from VC's Clayton Cowles. Already from this first page of the issue, you can see just how much personality Guerin is lending towards the page with this really interesting hue of negative space, with Rogue teasing this first issue and like a psychic assault here from Dr. Philip Scurvy. Excuse me, I don't know if he's a doctor, but from Philip Scurvy in general over the course of some of these background pages. Really beautiful colors in this issue, and I think just the way that Rogue is reacting to Scurvy's presence in the issue just builds a really visceral sense of emotion over on the page here too. Also, I love some of the canted angles that we have here and the fact that this negative space is still bleeding into the rest of the page with this really interesting bleed with Cyclops, just giving this really interesting sense of chaos towards some of these elements too. Javier Guerin, for me, I think is probably one of the best artists at Marvel, and it's always a treat to see his name on the covers of some of these issues. Okay, on this next page, we get to see a big and foreboding sense of Mr. Scurvy here in the bottom right corner of the page. He's interacting directly with Rogue, apologizing to him and saying that he has a few orders across this issue. One interesting sense that I was able to follow across this preview is the fact that Scurvy does seem a little bit remorseful towards how he's handling some of these mutant characters, especially as we head towards the last page and we get to see both Professor Xavier tackling Scurvy head on across the series too. I'm wondering if he's going to be defecting against Dr. Ellis and maybe taking matters into his own hands very, very soon. So this is the page that we were talking about earlier. Once again, I think there's so much personality imbued in this page here from Javier Guerin. Watching Scurvy face off against Professor Xavier is so interesting because they seemingly have so much in common across this series. Before we navigate away from this preview, I even want to check in on some of the dialogue between these characters. Professor Xavier starts this off saying, "Have we met Mr. Scurvy?" To which Philip responds, "No, Charles, but I've been aware, how could I not? Are you holding my X-Men in thrall?" And more. "That's not possible. I would know, Cerebro would know." "I'm sorry, Charles, you are not the only one of your kind. Were 5 of us. The boy, Harvey X, he was called. He died. If you live, you can ask Rogue about it. We call ourselves the Avians, and we wanted no part of your bloody wars." Xavier says, "I don't believe you. I would know, I would sense you." And Scurvy says, "Do you want to know what he died of, Charles?" So in the first issue of Uncanny X-Men, we got the introduction of this Harvey X mutant character, and he's just had such a strong sense of repercussion across so many future issues of Uncanny X-Men. I think Gail Simone did a wonderful job sneaking in that plot thread and returning back to it just so many disparate times in future X-Men issues. I think this is a great way to position Uncanny X-Men to head out of this crossover and into the next storyline, and also just build a big sympathetic plot thread towards Scurvy and the rest of some of these characters too. Also, I love the idea of the Avians characters and how there's going to be even more new lore represented with this character of Scurvy and some of the rest of the Marvel heroes here. I feel like independent of Dr. Karina Ellis, Philip Scurvy is a much, much more interesting character as a result of just some of these first couple preview pages and the battle that they've had with Xavier moving forward and some of the rest of these characters. So all in all here, I think these are some wonderful preview pages from the latest issue of Uncanny X-Men. I am just in awe of how quick this series is moving alongside the main X-Men series. And I just hope moving forward that all of our X-Men creators are going to be able to continue with this breakneck sense of pacing, because I think it's made, From the Ashes look incredibly good, especially next to the high concept and super ambitious Krakoa storyline. I feel like one of the major pitfalls of the X-Men franchise, maybe before Krakoa, was that they dragged out a lot of the plotting way too long in storylines like Messiah Complex. Maybe due to the fact that this is only a four-part crossover, we haven't had, just as much as that slow plotting in terms of From the Ashes, and I really hope it continues even as we head into Manhunt X and the future of the property at large moving forward here. Next up, we have a super, super fun comic book that I'm really excited to explore in a lot more depth. First, let me make sure we have everything we need. Perfect. Looks like we should be all set to go here. We've also talked about this comic book previously in our stream today, but Marvel Comic Books has been shipping the core Amazing Spider-Man series fast and furiously as a result of this Eight Deaths of Spider-Man storyline. We saw a lot of previous writing here from Justina Ireland with art over from Gleb Melnikov. This issue is shifting back over to Joe Kelly with art from Kafu, who I'm such a big fan of across so many different series here. Most recently, I've loved some of Kafu's work on the main Venom book from Al Ewing. I feel like so much of his just character, what's the word I'm looking for? So much of his facial expressions have this like sinister undertone that do a great job just making these really interesting high concept storylines feel like, they're classical works of art as opposed to, comic book storylines that were invented maybe just a couple years to a few months ago. This issue kind of continues this really interesting role for the Amazing Spider-Man, as recently Peter Parker has been selected by the character of Doctor Doom to battle a covenant with the Scions of the Sidorak. Doom actually gave Peter Parker a brand new suit and the Reeds of Magador, which have allowed him to cheat death across so many disparate issues of the series. Peter Parker is starting to get really concerned that so many of his fights with these Scion characters have ended with his death. And for once, he's really trying to find a way to battle one of these Scion characters without having death as the end result. In the most recent issue of the series, we got to see Peter go up against the twins, or the sibling characters of Sierra and Calix. And Calix really represented the fact that he was no longer interested in battling Peter Parker as a result of the previous issue. So in this one, we're going to get to see Sierra go up against Peter Parker. One element that I want to touch on before we head into the interiors is just how the main cast has treated Peter Parker in his really time-consuming battle with so many of these different Scion characters in terms of the Covenant. Joe Kelly has continued to work on Peter's relationship with the character of Shay, and Peter has continually had to bail on so many dates in order to dispatch some of the rest of these Scion foes. It also feels like it's getting particularly what's the word? Particularly contentious between Aunt May and Peter Parker, as she also sees Peter just bailing on so many of her relationship opportunities with Aunt May to battle some of the rest of these Scion figures. And it feels like every single element of his supporting cast is starting to get a little bit tired of Peter's like absent-mindedness and the flaky way that he adopts so much of his relationships and social activities. Let's see if we can sense some of the elements of that subtext and just get up to speed on what's going on here with Amazing Spider-Man issue 65. By the way, I want to give a quick thank you over to Adventures in Poor Taste for posting so many of the previews of today's comic books as well. The Eight Deaths of Spider-Man continues. Spider-Man has faced 4 Scions and is running out of extra lives. This issue's Scion Sierra represents the very power of death itself and makes Spider-Man watch everything he loves die, Can Spider-Man possibly withstand this punishment? So it looks like this issue is colored by Frank D'Armata, and the cover is illustrated by Mark Bagley. Right from the jump here, I think it is so interesting to see Kafu able to render some of these scions, especially with Sira. The artwork from Gleb Melnikov is so much different than anything you're going to see here from Kafu, and just the attention to detail from Kafu is just quite striking here. I do think there's something really beautiful about Gleb Melnikov's attention to detail in terms of some of the movement for these figures here. But getting to see like these brand new Spider-Man villains rendered with such detail is just really, really fascinating here on the page. I want to go ahead and read some of Sira's dialogue as she approaches her battle with Peter Parker in this Covenant here. She says, "To be clear, this is a waste of time. All of it. The Covenant is nothing but the echo of two egos in collision. The unstoppable and the immovable, so stupid I hate it. I hate that I'm expected to come up to an insignificant rock hurtling around a most average star and engage with the champion of a race of unserious beings and pretend that anything we do here matters." Sira is definitely a pessimist, and I found it really engaging how in the previous issue of Amazing Spider-Man, she referenced the fact that so many of the other Scion characters have fallen to Peter, and she's sort of trepidatious to embark on a battle with him because she doesn't want to meet the same fate as some of those other Scion characters. So I really feel like the sense of characterization from Sira makes her stand out even amongst some of the other figures in the Amazing Spider-Man. And then here we have a double page spread where we can also see the character of Calix, who very confidently went into battle with Peter Parker and very promptly got his ass sort of handed to him in the previous installment here too. That's also probably another reason why Sira doesn't want to meet her same fate across the issue here. This is actually a double page spread. It's a little bit difficult to follow in the way that Marvel has outlined this preview issue, but my goodness, watching some of the character relationships and just how Kafu is able to handle the expressions from Peter and some of the rest of these characters is a lot of fun. I also found it really engaging how Sira took Peter Parker's joke about tinfoil Loki and just put it right back in his face here in like the second or third panel on the page. It's also interesting to see Peter get a little bit more vulnerable with the character of Sira as she mentions to him directly here, "I don't want to die again." She says to him, "I am certain that this is true. Are you ready?" And instead of fighting in the traditional way, Sira actually wants Peter to hold on to the sphere as long as he can, which may evoke some dark and negative feelings that he has towards maybe other characters or some of the mistakes that he's made recently. Instead of going into a physical battle, Sira tasks him with holding this sphere as long as he possibly can. So I really think there's an interesting resolution to this comic book that makes it a little bit different than a lot of the other previous Eight Deaths of Spider-Man issues in terms of the Amazing Spider-Man. I hope moving forward that Joe Kelly and Justina Ireland, if they have any issues of Amazing Spider-Man left, will go into that same sense of, basically ambition to wrap up these storylines in ways that don't feel quite as repetitive as some of the previous issues here. All in all, though, I think there's some really strong characterization between these figures, and I'm still feeling really confident about how Joe Kelly is writing The Amazing Spider-Man and Peter Parker. I had really, really high expectations for Eight Deaths of Spider-Man, and I'm happy to say that this series has mostly delivered in terms of its execution. I'd be really interesting to see how Joe Kelly is going to head into a new volume of Amazing Spider-Man that we're going to be touching on a little bit later here in terms of the stream. All right, let's see what we have next. I wanted to talk about All New Venom issue 2. There is a preview of the new comic book here from Adventures in Poor Taste. Unfortunately, I don't think these preview pages give us a lot of insight as to what's going to be happening in the remainder of the issue. Let's quickly set it up and talk a little bit about the future of All New Venom here before we head into next week's issue 2. This one is still written by Al Ewing, featuring art over from Carlos Gomez. And curiously enough, this all new Venom storyline is teasing who the actual wearer of the new symbiote is, as we don't know the identity of our lead hero in this new comic book. Let's quickly go over some of the candidates that Marvel has been teasing as to who is wearing Dylan Brock's Venom suit. We have Rick Jones, Robbie Robertson, Luke Cage, and Madam Mask. So one of these figures is actually going to be the one bearing the symbiote armor that we're going to see a little bit later in terms of the main series. Also, I think this cover is really, really striking and dynamic here, featuring Venom going up against so many of these other disparate AIM scientists. Let's check out the solicit. AIM and Fire. AIM are on the hunt for the all-new Venom, and they're not alone. Who are the Symbiote Squad? Meanwhile, Dylan Brock's search for the new Venom puts him on a collision course with the deadly Madam Mask, and the mystery deepens as one suspect is eliminated with extreme prejudice. So here's our opening of the issue here. One really fun element about this first page is that so many of the suspects can be teased towards the top of Times Square across these disparate advertisements, as we have Luke Cage advocating to keep New York City clean, Madam Mask wanted by the FBI, Rick Jones. I feel like this is a big stretch here, trying to put him on the cover of whatever Sidekick magazine is. Finally, here we have Robbie Robertson advertising the Daily Bugle, which also is kind of a bit of a stretch here, if you ask me, as he's more part of the editorial as opposed to being like the face of the newspaper itself. And then we have our villains for the issue teasing the identity of Venom, saying, okay, there are 4 possibilities here. It's a little bit fun to see Al Ewing get a little bit meta in terms of his representation of the comic book. And then I want to introduce some of these characters here. We have a cast of villains saying, we could beat you into paste, or you could beat us. But you're one symbiote and we're the Death Throes, New York's oldest surviving organized theme criminal collective. And we get to see the Death Throes battling against all new Venom in some of the rest of these pages before we even get to see them come into blows here. All New Venom says they don't have to be afraid, we've changed. As I mentioned earlier, I wish there was a little bit more content teasing what's going to be featured in the remainder of the issue, but at least one sense I can get is that the tease of who the All New Venom character is as a result of some of these disparate New York City characters is really going to be referenced and played up across future issues. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on what's going to happen next for All New Venom, and we'll report back as soon as there's something interesting to say here. Okay, we mentioned earlier that this is a massive week of publishing in terms of Marvel Comics. Marvel has been doing a great job in terms of diversifying the X-Men line by featuring so many female solo X-Men characters getting their own comic books. Next week, we're actually getting the debut of another brand new solo-led X-Men female comic book with Magic issue 1. This one looks really, really fascinating as it features writing over from Ashley Allen, who I'm not super familiar with. But curiously enough, we have artwork here from German Peralta. German Peralta is such a great artist. Peralta previously worked on a S.H.I.E.L.D. comic book. I believe he also did some work over for Black Panther. There's just something really interesting and beautiful about his sketchy line that does a great job pulling on like darker and more edgy content that I feel like is going to really suit this character of Magic incredibly naturally. I'm also curious to see how Ashley Allen is going to be writing this character of Magic. She's a really hard character to get right in terms of Marvel's X-Men, but she's so unique and has such an interesting backstory due to the fact that she grew up here on Limbo and also has connections towards a really important X-Men with Colossus here. Let's go ahead and dive into the first issue of Magic and give a big thank you here to Adventures in Poor Taste. The Mystic Mutant goes demon hunting in her own new ongoing series. The X-Men Ilyana Rasputin strikes out on her own with new allies and dark powers arrayed against her. Something ancient has awakened beneath the Alaskan ice. Unfortunately for it, that's Magic's territory now. Written by rising star Ashley Allen and illustrated by the incomparable German Peralta. Oh, he also worked on a Loki series too. This is a stylish and high-octane demon hunting adventure starring the fiercest X-Men of them all. I want to quickly shout out here how so many of the From the Ashes preview pages or like teaser pages featuring the credits have had this great sense of design. I'm loving how much different this one is from Magic due to the fact that it has this like darker background in terms of the issue. I want to give a really big shout out here over to designer Jay Bowen. Okay, so in addition to Ashley Allen and German Peralta, we have colors from Arthur Hesley, letters from VC's Ariana Mayer, and that cover that we were looking at before is from J. Scott Campbell and Tanya Leho. Man, hopefully I got that name right, especially because it ends in an X. The island nation of Krakoa was a safe haven for all mutants. But now that it is no more, mutants find themselves once again displaced across the globe with Magic and the X-Men pushing back against an unjust world. So one of my favorite things about the solo-led X-Men female series is that they've done a great job referencing the characters' current destination in terms of continuity. That recent Psylocke series did a great job pulling on a ton of plot threads involving Psylocke being a member of the main X-Men team and teasing her relationship to that series and how it's going to play out across her own solo series. This new Magic comic book has taken a lot of those same cues here and is really trying to ground Magic in terms of her role on the X-Men as opposed to what she's going to be doing here in her own solo series too. Take a look at this first page teasing this town in Alaska called Juneau, featuring some really beautiful artwork here from Peralta. Peralta is so great at drawing some of these horror figures, and I think that big and bombastic expression that we get for this bystander who unfortunately gets attacked here from this mysterious character does a great job grounding the series in just a really, really dark tone here. Also, the way this page is laid out is really amazing, with the main panel serving as the framing, and then we have these two bleeds here in the foreground here. And then this figure gets dragged away here. We also get the reveal that she may be a mutant, judging by some of the webbing in her hands and that really interesting sense of connective tissue here. Sadly, she's driven away here by a really interesting foe and says, "I'm not ready, I don't want to," and doesn't even really get the chance to finish that sentence before being dragged away. We immediately get some kind of POV over from Magic Ilyana Rasputin as she says, "I used to dwell on what my life could have been like without wasting my childhood in the eternal hellscape of Limbo. I hope it might have been something like this, peaceful, idyllic, and bright, a feeling of hope without its preceding sorrow. When I was kidnapped by the demon Belasco, I thought my life was over. He saw my potential and hungered to influence my power. He planted a seed of evil in my soul and forced it to grow. Yet I hoped and I managed to finally escape becoming a New Mutant and X-Man. I became more than what he pushed me into. I won, and demons buried my past. I won, and I buried my demons in the past." Immediately, this comic book is touching on the really fascinating origin of Magic Ilyana Rasputin and is actually diving straight into her relationship with Colossus as well. That's going to fuel so much of the backstory and subtext for her character too. Also, just the expressions from Peralta really carry the subtext and just dark overtones of the issue really nicely, even as Oyana really appreciates a nice moment with her brother, even though it's interrupted here by the mysterious appearance of the character who I believe is the Dark Child. Let's read what the Dark Child has to say to Ilyana. It is over. It was over the minute you freed yourself from your prison. How selfish of you. Limbo was merely our genesis. You're right. So this is a really dark and climactic page that we've seen here, especially as it's interspersed with that previous page teasing Magic's relationship with her brother and the Dark Child that we saw in that one panel as well. Of course, you probably could have guessed it due to the fact that so many of these pages harken back to her past, but it looks like this is just a dream that Ilyana was experiencing, and that she's actually grounded here in the factory, the X-Men's headquarters over in Merle, Alaska. Let's check in on some of her dialogue and see Ilyana, trepidatiously head into her surprise party. Darkchild haunts me in Krakoa. She was quiet, Belasco's influence a distant memory. I believed her control over me was gone. But this is the third time this week, the same dream, the same mistake, the same ending. Yes, Limbo forged me into something stronger, but at what cost? What wires get crossed in the name of evolution? What patterns do we learn to survive? I thought I'd managed to untangle those threads, but opening myself up, softening myself, cost me my home. Yet selfishly, I liked who I was becoming. However, I won't make that same mistake again, not if it costs the X-Men their new star. And then we can see so many of our main X-Men characters over in the factory, like Beast, Juggernaut, Quentin Quire, Temper, and Psylocke shouting surprise, with Cyclops saying, "You didn't think you could avoid another year of celebrating, did you?" And in the background here, we can see Magic saying, "I just know Kitty had something to do with this." Okay, so there's a ton of plot threads opened up here involving Magic and Ilyana in this first issue of the core series. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Ashley Allen explores her role as an X-Men versus what she's going to experience as her own solo character. Ilyana has so much baggage that I think was referenced pretty nicely here in these first couple preview pages. And also, I think probably out of all the artists Marvel could have selected, German Peralta is among one of the very, very best in terms of just how versatile he is as an artist and how horrific some of his visuals can get across the page. I really hope this book has the potential to be like a long-running series that can delve really deeply into the psychological nature of Magic. This is such a cool character who I don't think ever has really reached her full potential in terms of what she could offer the rest of the Marvel Universe. And I would love it if this series could really capitalize on what she could really bring to the X-Men Marvel Universe as a solo character. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break here, and then we're going to be back with some comic book news. Okay, this comic book news article was actually written yesterday, and it was just a huge bombshell coming in from Marvel Comics. One of the most important comic books each year at the publisher is their free comic book day offerings. And curiously enough, yesterday towards the end of the day, Marvel Comics actually released a brand new article sharing some brand new pages from upcoming Marvel Free Comic Book Day issues. We already teased the fact that there's a big Ultimate story that's referenced here, and there's even some new stuff over in terms of the Fantastic Four as well. This one was published on January 3rd. Get your first look at Marvel's 2025 Free Comic Book Day titles. See what Marvel has in store for Free Comic Book Day 2025, including stories starring the Fantastic Four, X-Men, and more. Free Comic Book Day is on May 3rd this year, and once again, Marvel Comics celebrates this exciting day for the industry with something for every fan. Readers can look forward to the entry points for all new eras of Fantastic Four, Amazing Spider Man, a prelude to an upcoming X-Men saga, and get a glimpse at the very first event set in the Ultimate Universe. For the second year in a row, Marvel is also proudly presents a Star Wars free comic book day title that features what's to come in the galaxy far, far away, plus see creators and characters from different cultures, communities, and identities spotlighted in a free comic book day edition of Marvel's Voices. All right, there's a ton to talk about here, but I think for now we're going to skip over Free Comic Book Day Spidey and his amazing friends. In fact, we are going to cover the story like this. Perfect. Okay. So right now, the Fantastic Four are in a really interesting place in terms of Marvel's continuity, as the One World Under Doom event is impending over the next few months, featuring Doom getting awesome, like almost infinite power here. Let's go ahead and explore. Oh, okay, I see, I see. Give me just a moment here. Okay, perfect. So what this article really is doing is teasing some of the brand new interior pages that we have for these upcoming Marvel Comics stories. Let's see. The first one that we're looking at today is the Free Comic Book Day 2025 Fantastic Four Giant Size X-Men #1. And we have some interior art on the issue coming in over from Umberto Ramos. This one looks like it introduces some alien characters with a much older Johnny Storm and just a slightly refreshed version of the Fantastic Four's costumes. Really nice page actually coming in from Umberto Ramos here. I think there's a little bit more, a little bit stronger sense of anatomy than we can see from some of his other pages. I also really like that sense of like purple flame in the background, teasing that there might be some arcane sensibilities in some future issues too. Okay, next up we have a tease at what's included in terms of that X-Men comic book. This one is actually illustrated over from Iban Coelho. I believe this is the entry written over from Chip Zdarsky and actually shows the X-Men facing off against each other, seemingly, as we have Cyclops mounting his eye laser against Colossus with figures like Storm and Wolverine in the background. Curiously enough, some of these figures are featured in their more classic costumes here, so I'm wondering if this is going to be set firmly in Marvel's continuity or what they have in store for the future of this book. I really like some of Iban Coelho's visuals, and I think that there's a great just visceral sensibility to this page here too. All right, let's see what's in store for us next. Here we have a look at the Free Comic Book Day Amazing Spider-Man Ultimate Universe issue 1 page. I was referencing this previously over in our stream because it looks like it reenacts that Free Comic Book Day storyline, which teased the formation of the Ultimate Universe, as we have the character of the Maker checking in with Miles Morales like he did towards the beginning of this series. This is a lot different than some of the first visuals we saw from Brian Hitch, as this page is illustrated from Jonas Scharf. I think Jonas Scharf is just an incredible artist. I love his personality that he's able to imbue in some of these pages, and that just really like thick black line that he uses that builds up Just so much tension and so many of the disparate panels here. I think there's just great stuff on this page. Okay, let's see if you guys can see this one. This is a look at the Spider-Man issue of the Free Comic Book Day storyline. As you can see here, it looks like Peter Parker is going up against an adversary on this page. John Romita Jr.'s art continues to be incredibly stylized here, but one thing I like about this is just the sense of verticality that Romita Jr. has. I wish that some of the anatomy on Peter Parker, Spider-Man in particular, was smoothed out a little bit, but I do think that there's a great sense of ambition in terms of the layout of this image, and I'm curious to see like what the rest of the issue is going to look like. Nobody Except Me says Ultimates finally getting into some of that classic Hickman sci-fi. That's a great comment. Nobody Except Me. I think the Ultimates has had a long time coming for some of that coverage, and I'd love to see just more core plot elements of the main Ultimate Invasion series start to spill into the main Ultimates book too. Even though that book has done just a great job building out its own vision of the Ultimates characters. Okay, on the other side here, we get to see Peter checking in with the rest of his supporting cast characters. I believe this figure in the first panel is Shay, who looks a lot different than what we've seen from artists like Gleb Melnikov or Kafu when they draw this character, or even Ed McGuinness. But I still think John Romita Jr. is able to evoke some of those warm feelings that he's trying to pull out over in the comic book. Man, I'm really not sure who this character is on the third panel. I'm wondering if it is Benjamin Rabin or Wyep or one of those figures too. On the next image, we get a vision of a plane, and then a tease over at Norman Osborn. The relationship between Norman Osborn and Peter Parker was such like a core element of Zeb Wells' Amazing Spider-Man. I really want to see what Joe Kelly has to say about Peter and Norman moving forward, and if Joe Kelly is really willing to accept Norman Osborn as a hero and accomplice to Peter Parker, or if he's going to be returning to a villain. Man, the relationship between Peter and Aunt May has been really fraught across these last couple issues of Spider-Man 2. So I'm interested to see if Joe Kelly is going to release some of the tension with Aunt May and Peter, and if things are going to be able to go a little bit closer to normal with these two figures as we move forward. Okay, let's see our next page. Here we have a look at Free Comic Book Day, Ironheart, Marvel's Voices #1 by Julian Shaw. Man, I think this is a really beautiful page with a great composition and sense of energy here. I can definitely see that the anatomy for some of these figures are more exaggerated, but I'm loving the ambition that we have in terms of the range of motion for these characters. And here we have a Phil Noto page from Star Wars. I'm a little curious to see who the creative team is on this book. So the writing is from Alex Segura, Charles Soule, and Mark Guggenheim. We have art from Phil Noto, Stefano Raphael, and Madabek Musabekov. Great creative team from the writing and the arts. Man, it's really cool to see Phil Noto draw Luke Skywalker. And man, there's some great panel bleeds on this page here too. Next up, we have a Luke Ross page of Free Comic Book Day 2025 Star Wars #1. Man, Luke Ross is such a great like noir artist at Marvel Comics. Really cool to see his interpretation of Darth Vader here. Very similar to Jonas Scharf. I love that like thick black line he has in a lot of his pages too. Here we have a page from Madabak Musabekov. Hopefully I'm getting that name right. I'm not familiar with this artist, but I think this page really speaks for itself. I'm kind of curious to see if that is maybe Qui-Gon Jinn as he's walking across, the slums here. There's so much detail in this fourth panel, and there's a fifth one that has a really interesting sense of framing here with like an overhead shot and some of these animals being featured across the rooftops. I'd love to see this guy maybe draw an X-Men book moving forward. These are amazing visuals. Okay, and it looks like that's everything we had here as we come full circle and check out this Umberto Ramos page of Fantastic Four and X-Men. I would say a lot of the artwork in these books look really, really good. It feels like there's still a lot to be excited about in terms of Free Comic Book Day from Marvel. I mean, for me, the most exciting page that we saw here was definitely this fascinating interpretation of Peter's encounter with the Maker from the Free Comic Book Day issue of a previous year, illustrated by Jonas Scharf. But all around here, I think there's so many interesting visuals and so many great artists that Marvel has tapped across all these books here. Lots to be excited about as we start to head into May 3rd and see the brand new era of Free Comic Book Day. Man, Marvel needs to update their website so it's easier to cover, some of their own images. Okay, we still have a couple super important articles. Let's talk about an article that we've been teasing all stream long here. Let's see. So I've already talked at length about how much I've enjoyed Joe Kelly's run over on The Amazing Spider-Man. Let's go ahead and talk about Joe Kelly, Pepe Larraz, and John Romita Jr. Relaunching The Amazing Spider-Man with a new #1 this April in 2025. First off, I want to dive deep into the cover as I'm starting to see some characters from Zeb Wells' run who are really standing out to me. We have Ashley Kafka, who's been such a fun addition to the Rogues Gallery in a great way to make Norman Osborn even more paranoid than he already is. Very happy to see the Hobgoblin, who was also teased in some fun issues of Zeb Wells' Spider-Man 2. We have Craven the Hunter next to Chasm. Chasm sort of ended Zeb Wells' run by taking a more heroic moment, but has already been teased to be backsliding into villainy over the course of some final issues. So I'm interested to see what sort of plot threads Joe Kelly is going to be writing with him. Also, we have the female version of Elektra, I believe, and Tombstone. Very happy to see Tombstone reemerging as a foe for the Amazing Spider-Man. I'd be really interested to see what kind of plot threads Joe Kelly is going to be working on with that character. We also have Black Cat Felicia Hardy, who I believe has been in a couple recent issues of Amazing Spider-Man also. Plus, we have a return of the Rhino and the Sandman, too. So, tons of villains permeating across this brand new issue of Joe Kelly's main series. But at this point, I'm at a loss for what the main driving hook is going to be for this series, and if there's going to be any sense of a big core concept kicking it off here. Let's check out this article over from Marvel.com. This one was published December 19th. Amazing Spider-Man begins a new era with Joe Kelly, Pepe Larraz, and John Romita Jr. Marvel Comics history is made this April with the launch of a new volume of its most iconic title, Amazing Spider-Man. Announced exclusively earlier today from Polygon, the next era of the beloved series will be brought to you by Amazing Spider-Man and Deadpool scribe Joe Kelly, legendary Amazing Spider-Man artist John Romita Jr., and one of the industry's most contemporary artists, Pepe Larraz, fresh off his exemplary work of Blood Hunt and X-Men. I know I've said this sort of ad nauseum in terms of the Zeb Wells run on Amazing Spider-Man, but I don't necessarily think that artist John Romita Jr. is the best fit for the modern era of Amazing Spider-Man. I'm sure Joe Kelly will be able to work with John Romita Jr. in the future and probably pull some amazing issues. I did like some of the elements of the preview pages we witnessed, but I'd be probably a bigger fan if we got to see some of these newer, more contemporary artists work alongside Joe Kelly in some of these future issues. I'm sure we'll get somebody like Pepe Larraz filling in some future installments, but I'm greedy and I want to see more artists I love working on the core series. The new Amazing Spider-Man will deliver classic Spidey storytelling with bold new horizons for Spider-Man, his supporting cast, including the recently redeemed Norman Osborn and Peter's new girlfriend Shay, and the greatest supervillains in all of pop culture. Okay, very happy to see that this article references that Norman Osborn is still redeemed. I'm very curious to see Peter Parker check in on his relationship with Norman that we already explored was one of like the driving plot elements for Zeb Wells' run. Also, I want to see Peter's relationship with Shay get a little bit more interesting. I want to see like what makes them stick out as a couple as opposed to like what Peter and Mary Jane had in past issues. The new run finds Peter without a job and looking for gainful employment, but his job search is interrupted by a rampaging rhino who is but the tip of a sinister iceberg. What major Spider villain is working behind the scenes, weaponizing other Spider Man villains that we haven't seen in over 7 years? Also, what is the goblin free Norman Osborn up to these days? Even though this is a new #1, I don't think of it as a restart, Kelly explained to Polygon. I'm writing the next chapter of the story of one of the world's greatest characters, lucky enough to follow in the footsteps of the folks before me. If Joe Kelly came in here and said he was writing Amazing Spider Man with a brand new fresh start and not taking any of the plot threads from Wells, I would absolutely be raging right now. That is absolutely the correct thing for Joe Kelly to say to get me interested to the series. And I'm happy to say that, he's sharing that same sentiment that I have. After that sinks in, I spend a lot of time thinking about what I love about Spider Man and his cast, what stories resonated with me at different times in my life, and how I can synthesize all of that into something that works with what came before but breaks new ground. I feel a drive to take bold, unexpected swings in order to see how Spider Man deals with Marvel sized curveballs. Pressure makes diamonds. What a fantastic quote here. Whenever I read like really well explored characters like Peter Parker, I always want the creative team to push the limit of what you can do with the character in terms of like modern Marvel continuity. To hear Joe Kelly share, that same sentiment, and also to not have like a complete restart with the Amazing Spider-Man is exactly what I want to hear. I'm feeling really confident about the future of Amazing Spider-Man, especially because Joe Kelly has written such strong Amazing Spider-Man stories in the past, like the American Sun comic book that I've really loved previously here too. The most important part of Spider-Man that I wanted to portray accurately is Peter. This is coming from artist Pepe Larraz. Of course, I can talk about drawing a believable New York. I shot hundreds of picture details of the city for reference. Very cool, very cool. Loving the attention to detail from Pepe Larraz. There's a reason why he's so important and really heralded as such an important artist in terms of his craft. Let's see. Or how I focused on drawing the flow of Spidey's movement and speed in a way closer to animation than comics. But I think Spider-Man comics work because we care about Peter and his world, so that was my main focus, to draw a Peter that you instantly recognize and empathize with. I didn't think we could get Joe for a substantial run of Amazing Spider-Man, Nick Lowe added. He's always so busy with animation and television and movies, so he usually just dips in and out of comics. Interesting. Interesting to hear that maybe Nick Lowe was the person who was able to tap Joe Kelly to have an elongated run of this series. Very much similar to Nick Lowe. I'm very happy that Kelly was able to clear some of his schedule with animation and television and movies and head over to comic books for an extended run of Spider-Man. That's why I tapped him for 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, said Nick Lowe. He was doing so great. So when he'd asked if we'd consider him to be the ongoing writer, I felt like I won the lottery. Add Pepe Larraz's masterful and supersonic talent to the equation, and we knew we had all the makings of an instant classic. Then, John Romita Jr. agreed to stay on. Fireworks went off. I better go buy some lottery tickets. Nick Lowe is so great at writing, articles like that or quotes like that. I've read so many from him across the years. The fun part for me, though, is that I agree with him. Maybe aside from John Romita Jr., I think Pepe Larraz and Joe Kelly are just absolute masterful creators. I have just a great idea in mind here for the future of Amazing Spider-Man. We've already talked about this previously. I wish this comic book wasn't relaunching, but if that is the only sort of negative aspect alongside John Romita Jr. that we have to scale moving forward for the Amazing Spider-Man, I'm still really confident about the future of this series here. Frankly, I wonder if Marvel's editorial is like mandating all of these writers to have a brand new number one just to keep the sales really strong when they head into a new Amazing Spider-Man issues. This one is on sale April 9th, so we only have a couple months to wait here to see what the future of Spider-Man is going to look like. Maybe one last thing we should mention before we head into our next story is that Marvel didn't look like they wanted to make Joe Kelly official until he was done with 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. 8 Deaths of Spider-Man has been pretty phenomenal, with these past couple issues here. So, and as mentioned earlier, I'm feeling really, really confident about the future of this franchise, and I just can't wait to see, what we're going to be introduced to next and what kind of big and long stories Joe Kelly is going to be telling with these characters. I would love to see some really robust follow-up in terms of Peter Parker and Chasm specifically in the near future. Okay, my voice is getting absolutely shredded here. So we're going to touch on maybe our last article for today and then save some of the fun stuff over for next week. Let's go ahead and talk about the crossover that we've been hyping up all stream long here. This one published December 16th over from Marvel. Charles Xavier, the most dangerous mutant on the world, is on the run in X-Men hunts. Professor X's escape from Greymalkin prison sends the X-Men's world into chaos in X-Men Hunt, an 8-part crossover this March. X-Men Hunt, the next milestone X-Men crossover, arrives in March, bringing the current ongoing X titles together for the first time this era. X-Men Hunt will have chapters in Uncanny X-Men, NYX Storm, X-Men X Factor, and X-Force, along with a tie-in issue of Exceptional X-Men, before concluding in X-Men Hunt Omega, a double-sized finale one-shot. The saga kicks off when Professor X breaks out of Greymalkin prison, sowing division and discord among the different mutant factions. For his crimes against humanity at the end of the Krakoan Age, Charles Xavier remains a heavily guarded inmate at a mutant detention center built at his former school, a cruel punishment he was willing to accept until now. Driven by a mysterious new purpose, Professor X frees himself from captivity to undertake a mission of personal significance. He has no time to lose as a telepathic virus wreaks havoc on his mind and those around him. I can understand that we have some X-Men characters that aren't super happy with Professor Xavier, but I still feel like at the end of the day, Xavier did have the best interests of some of these X-Men characters in mind towards the end of Rise of the Powers of 10, even though he was able to take on some really morally dubious ways to get what he wanted. At the end of the day here, though, I'm still wondering why so many of our X-Men characters are really trying to come to blow towards him when, for the most part, he was just looking to help. The hunt for the most dangerous X-Men in the world begins, and Professor X desperately calls on his X-Men. Some are ready to forgive, others are not, and while his once loyal followers clash to decide his fate, the X-Men's founder will be forced to reckon with his tarnished legacy once and for all. Even though I just had that rant about Professor X not being that bad in terms of Marvel's current continuity, I will say it's not that much of a surprise to see that Cyclops harbors some negative feelings towards him. I feel like Cyclops has taken on a lot of dubious roles recently, especially before the Krakoan era in terms of Marvel's comics, especially with his relationship with Jean Grey. So I feel like Cyclops should be a darker character than some of the rest of the X-Men, and I do like the fact that he's maybe pushing against Xavier a little bit more than some of the rest of these characters. We've mostly been keeping the various groups of X characters separated from one another as we set up the post Krakoa landscape, executive editor Tom Brevoort explained. But it feels like now is the right time to send them crashing into one another. And who better to instigate this situation than the disgraced Professor X, who has intimate connections with almost all of our key players? I like this cover from David Marquez that we have for Uncanny X-Men 11. I feel like it does a great job just dialing up the tension between Xavier and all the rest of these big and important X-Men heroes. So this issue, chapter 11, still written by Gail Simone. Interestingly enough, though, this one actually features art from Javier Guerin, who we just checked out with that other issue of Uncanny X-Men, featuring a cover by the excellent David Marquez. This one is on sale March 5th. X Manhunt Part 1. At the end of the Orcus War, Charles Xavier surrendered himself to the authorities and allowed himself to be imprisoned in Greymalkin. But now something has spurred him into action, into escaping his incarceration, and embarking on a mad scramble across the nation. What has caused Professor X to go on the run, and will his assorted pupils move to protect him, recapture, or kill him? The answer, of course, is all of the above. In this opening chapter, Rogue and her team of X-Men are forced to ally with their worst enemy in order to betray their most trusted friend. Yeah, Rogue didn't seem that trepidatious to ally with Professor Xavier moving forward. So I'm interested to see how that storyline is going to be set up moving forward. Also, it looks like this is a 7-part crossover event, so it's much longer than Raid on Greymalkin. But I'm happy. I'm actually pretty happy to see that it's going to be a little bit longer, especially as it's stretching into so many of these other X-Men comic books. I really hope that this storyline is going to feel cohesive due to the fact that we have so many different people working on it. What do we have here? NYX issue 9. This one written by Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing, art by Francesco Mortarino, and a cover from Sarah Pichelli. Man, that is a really, really visceral cover. Just showing a ton of animosity here just from the facial expression of Professor Xavier. X-Manhunt Part 2. Charles Xavier is on the run and his first stop is New York. But there are plenty of mutants in the city who want nothing to do with the most recent master plan of the disgraced Professor X. Will the return of their nearly departed mentor bolster the burgeoning community that calls itself NYX, or tear everything they built apart? What does Xavier want from the city? What is he willing to do to get what he wants? And perhaps, most alarmingly of all, who else is waiting in the wings to strike? I would say, out of all of the crossover issues that we've checked out, this one is probably going to be really difficult. It feels like Professor Xavier is pretty far removed to everything Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing are doing in NYX. So even though Professor Xavier does have ties to characters that are really front and center of NYX, like Kamala Khan, I'm wondering if this crossover is going to feel cohesive or kind of a little bit forced in terms of the greater narrative here. Next up, we have a crossover issue that I think makes a little bit more sense with X-Manhunt issue 3 playing out in Storm Chapter 6. Storm has had a lot of interesting conversations recently with Xavier, especially towards the end of the Krakoan era. I feel like it's going to be a much more natural fit to see these two characters engage with each other. This one has the exact same creative team as previous issues, featuring writing from Marewa Ayadeli, art from Lucas Wernick, and covers from Mateus Manhanini. X-Manhunt Part 3. Fugitive Charles Xavier seeks refuge in Storm's sanctuary, Storm's floating home in Atlantis City, and the Alaskan X-Men take notice. Will Storm and the X-Men join forces with Professor X to prevent his return to prison by any means necessary, or will they fall victim to opposing views that will send X-Men in a bloody brawl to the death? And making his From the Ashes debut is the unstoppable devourer, the blue-skinned Zulu Titan Maggot. I'm not super familiar with Maggot. It's going to be fun to see him interact with Storm and the rest of the cast here. Also, man, the way Mateus Manhanini has drawn Storm's hair like a clown is such an interesting visual here that is interspersed so nicely with Xavier's really creepy Krakoan era helmet in the background of the issue. I also like the setup of this storyline. It feels a little bit more natural, a little bit more cohesive, as we have a Storm trying to take refuge, or excuse me, Xavier trying to take refuge in Storm's sanctuary in Atlanta. I think that's a great way to expand that plot thread too. And also, I like the fact that the X-Men of Alaska, helmed by Cyclops, are already, taking notice or have an idea of what's going on there moving forward. And in fact, it looks like those heroes are on the cover of the next issue of X-Men Hunt. This is X-Men 13, part 4 of 7 of X-Men Hunt. I also like how the logo features, I believe, Professor X at different elements of the trade dress here. That's really cool. Okay, so this one is a little bit different than our core X-Men creative team. We still have writing from Jed MacKay, and we still have a cover from Ryan Stegman, but we have Neto Diaz on the interiors, who kind of goes back and forth with Ryan Stegman on the main series. I like Neto Diaz's artwork. I feel like it's also pretty visually interesting and has just, a great sensibility to it, too. I particularly love the way that Neto Diaz has been able to draw Beast in some previous issues of X-Men. X-Men Hunt Part 4. This is X-Men issue 13. The X-Men have caught up with their erstwhile mentor, Professor Xavier, on his mad scramble across the country, but they aren't the only ones who have found him. This cover shows some of our main X-Men heroes as skeletons, still wearing some of their main X-Men costumes. Plus, we have Storm in the background, too, teasing her appearance from the last issue of X-Men Hunt. This is a really, really beautiful cover. I'm loving how much symbolism it's able to evoke in the core series. Okay, let's see. Next up, we have part 5, heading into X Factor, a comic book that I'm just woefully behind on as of right now. This has our usual creative team here of Mark Russell, Bob Quinn, and Greg Land. Looks like we have a confrontation between the Summers brothers, Havoc, and Cyclops. Charles Xavier has escaped from prison, and X Factor must track him down. But how will the X-Men react to X Factor hunting their founder, and what will happen when Havoc and Cyclops collide? I always love it when there's heat between these two characters. I feel like a lot of the writers were able to have a lot of fun in Dark Web and Hellions when both Alex and Scott were at each other's throats here, especially in terms of X Factor. I'm wondering if, maybe Havoc is going to be having some warmer feelings towards Professor Xavier than Scott does over the course of this series. Although I'm not a big fan of this Greg Land cover. I feel like some of these facial expressions I've probably seen here before. All right, we have X-Men Hunt Chapter 6 taking place in X-Force issue 9. This is another situation where I think everything going on with X-Force doesn't really gel well with the overall direction of the line or Professor Xavier. But I'm curious to see, how the creative team and Marvel's editorial is going to try to get this one to work. Looks like X-Force 9 still has writing from Jeffrey Thorne, art from Marcus Toe, and a cover from Steven Segovia. X-Men Hunt Part 6. Sage and Professor X go way back to another war and another time. But now in his hour of most desperate need, will Sage use her talents to aid Professor X's quest or put a stop to his manic mission? The penultimate chapter of X-Men Hunt brings X-Force into the fray. I'm liking that sensibility of the planet behind so many of the rest of our X-Force characters, and that Professor Xavier may have some implications towards the background of the cover. Also, I think Steven Segovia's imagery here is just really, really beautiful. Okay, finally, let's check in on the last issue of Exceptional X-Men. Also, the last and final issue of X-Manhunt across the main X-Men series. I'm wondering if this chapter is teasing Mr. Sinister due to that really interesting shadow in the background. This one's still written by Eve Ewing, featuring art from Carmen Carnero. X-Manhunt Collateral Damage. With Charles Xavier on the run, Emma Frost and Kitty Pryde reckon with their own dreams and fears for the future of mutant kind. Axo feels pushed away from the team and pulled closer to the charismatic technologist Sheldon Xenos. But who is Xenos? But is Xenos who he claims to be? Spoiler, he is not. I'm wondering if this character is Mr. Sinister Nathaniel Essex or has some deeper ties to the character as well. I'm loving the sense of negative space and all the emotion Carmen Carnero is able to bring to the forefront of this issue. Very excited about what the future holds for Exceptional X-Men and the fact that this issue feels like it's going to be really core to the main series, despite the fact that we have Professor Xavier in the background. Okay, this is our very last issue of X-Manhunt, taking place independently of one of the core X-Men books. This one written by Gail Simone and Morewa Ayadeli, featuring art and cover from Gleb Melnikov. X-Manhunt Finale. X-Manhunt concludes as Professor X reaches his destination with his assorted pursuers, friend and foe alike. Alliances will be battle-tested, the blades of betrayals will cut deep with poison tips, and when the dust finally settles, Xavier will have to make a tectonic, shifting choice with the fate of all mutant kind in the balance. The world is about to change, and this time around, everyone is awake. I'm loving all the symbolism that Gleb Melnikov is able to introduce on this cover. It's definitely a little bit more animated than the rest of these images, but just that sensibility of all these characters interacting with each other and the strong stakes that the background gives is really beautiful. And it looks like this one is concluding over on March 26th here, marking the end of X-Manhunt for the rest of our X-Men characters. All right, and without further ado here, I think that's going to go ahead and do it over for our stream. I want to thank everybody for showing up and checking out our stream today. It was really fantastic to be back and to cover so many of these disparate X-Men comic books. Moving forward, we will hopefully be back and returning to streaming here. I'm going to continue to work on some videos over in the background, and in the meantime, I really hope you're enjoying some of these books as much as I am. If you haven't already, I want to encourage you to go ahead and like the stream and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't been already. Thank you one last time for checking out our stream, and we'll be back here in the near future to touch on everything X-Men, Spider-Man, and the future of Marvel.